Welcome back, Screenagers. It's another episode of the Canon. As always, your favorite movie podcast, the one and only movie podcast providing you with a watch list of the most essential movies ever made. We have another essential movie for you today as part of our double feature episode episodes that we're doing on this lovely Wednesday. Right now, we're going to be talking about The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. Very excited for this one. I had not seen it before, but joining me to talk about it, a return guest, a very, very, very great guest, super insightful. I love talking to this guy, Jason Christian of the Cold War Cinema podcast. Welcome back. How's it going? How you doing?
It's going great. Thanks again for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
This movie kind of falls within your wheelhouse. I'm not sure if that's why you chose it or if it's just a movie that you enjoy and wanted a chance to chat about. But I am looking forward to getting your insight about this because, again, like I said, I hadn't seen this before, so I am interested to pick your brain about this movie. But before we get into the movie, like I mentioned, you host your own podcast, a great podcast, Cold War Cinema. I'm a big fan. For those who might not know too much about it, do you want to give a quick, brief overview of what it is that you guys are doing over there?
Yeah. The idea was to cover films that were made during the Cold War, which officially the dates of the Cold War are from 1947 to 1991, which 1947 was when President Truman unveils what's now called the Truman Doctrine, which was a policy to contain communism as it emerges around the globe. That was the guiding philosophy of US foreign policy. And then 91 is when the Soviet Union collapses. And so it's a whole different global world order from that point forward. So the idea of the podcast, though, is to discuss films made primarily during the early years of the Cold War that are
Mm-hmm.
somehow reflecting the tensions of the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union and other places in the world, either directly or kind of indirectly. And so at this point, we've mostly covered movies made in the 40s and 50s. We are going to start branching out and going further into the 60s and beyond. But season one is about each film that we cover in season one is directed by a blacklisted director, except for two of those films. And those two were written, the screenplays were written by blacklisted screenwriters. And these were people who were accused of being communists and they were shut out of the industry for more than a decade.
Mm-hmm.
So that's season one. Season two, we're doing an interesting thing where we're going back and forth every other episode. So we just released the first episode, which is about Sergei Eisenstein's Ivan the Terrible, which is a Soviet film. And there's a lot of interesting themes shown in that film, even though it's
Yeah.
about a medieval king. But we're next showing talking about a Hollywood film that's a very much anti-communist propaganda Hollywood film.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to follow that path throughout the whole season. So it'll bounce back and forth between Hollywood and Soviet Union, Hollywood, Soviet Union, kind of mirroring the tensions, the back and forth dialectic between those two superpowers. And we're just going to discuss films for the next year or so in that way.
I
So
love that. That's
that's what
awesome.
we're doing.
No, that sounds amazing. I am a big fan of the first season, and I really enjoy what it is that you guys are doing for the second season. It's a great show for anyone who is a film fan, for anyone who is a history buff, and then obviously there's a lot of crossover between people who are film buffs and history nerds. So a lot of great stuff there. I think exploring and like doing the back and forth of Soviet films versus like Hollywood films. Um, For those of us who maybe don't watch too many international movies and most of our understanding of film is just like through Hollywood, I think like getting that back and forth and like seeing, Soviet perspectives and like whether it be just like uh, Soviet propaganda or just like Soviet films that are being made in that time that are like that reflect sort of the psyche of the people there in that time. It'll just like help us better understand some of the American films that were being made then and have been made since. So
Yeah.
big fan of the show. Highly recommend.
Thank,
Uh,
thanks, thanks for saying that. Yeah, I'm glad you enjoy the show.
yeah, it's great, and there's a ton to learn. Um, unlike
We're
this
learning.
show
We're
where
learning too.
it's just people yapping. We're just yapping about movies that we like, which is also fun, ton of fun. We enjoy that. But if anyone wants to like learn some interesting stuff about history and film's relationship to history, I would highly recommend checking out Cold War cinema. Definitely worth your time.
Thank you.
Um, and then, so I mean, on top of that, you also, I know you write a bit. Anything recent, any like recent reviews or anything like that that you've done or want to shout out?
I don't know if I shouted this out last time I was on, but I reviewed this long book about cinema from the
Mhm.
60s and 70s. Did I shout that out last time?
I think you were working on it, but it wasn't out yet.
Yeah, and that was published with the Los Angeles Review of Books. It's a pretty lengthy essay about this kind of political cinema around the world that is in conversation with some of these things. That's been out for a couple months. Right now, I'm working on a book, a memoir, and so that's where all my focus is going to. And that's a whole a whole other story about my wild and crazy days living in Barcelona about 20 years ago. And
That
I'm just
sounds amazing.
yeah, it's been an interesting project. I'm finished with the book. I'm just putting finishing touches on it, revising it, and I'm hoping to send it out to some publishers next month, actually, to see if they'll. I'm trying to get it published, but right now I'm at the last tail end of revisions for like the eighth time. I've gone over this thing a million times, but I'm trying to perfect it. So that's what I'm working on.
That's awesome. That's so cool.
It's
Oh,
definitely unusual. Like there's never been a book quite like it, I think. I've never read anything quite like it. It's
mhm.
definitely I think that's why I'm drawn to, or I was for many years drawn to Treasure of Sierra Madre, because it has this adventure element. And that's
Mhm.
kind of what I was trying to do 20 years ago when I was romping around Spain. Very
You're on a
different.
quest for gold.
Not exactly, but I was on a quest for something, some kind of like personal meaning and
Mhm.
finding myself. So there's some overlap there for sure.
Nice. That's awesome. That's really cool. I'm excited to. I would love to read that. I'm sure it would be an an amazing read.
Well, it'll be something.
Yeah.
It'll be out in print at some point. I know. It's just a
Yeah.
matter of finding the right publisher.
Awesome. That I can't wait for the updates on that. I'll have to have you on next year. One, so we can talk about another movie, but two, so that we can get an update on where things are with the publishing of the book.
Yeah,
That's
that'd be great.
that's amazing. Um, but you mentioned that you were on a bit of an adventure, sort of similar to our characters in Treasure of the Sierra Madre. So I feel like that's a great opportunity for us to jump into the movie, jump into this adventure that they go on, and really just like pick apart what it is about this movie that makes it essential. Um, there's, I think like probably like you hear like, oh, this movie is essential. It's like one of the movies that you have to see before you die, and like most of us just know because of the famous line, right? We don't have to show you no stinking badges, which great line, amazing moment in the movie, but the movie is like obviously so much more than just that one single moment. Um, which I was like very pleased to sit with, to experience. I kind of wish that I got to watch it a second time, or that this wasn't my first viewing, because I feel like there is a ton here. But Jason, for you, when did you first like come across this movie? Is this something that is like sort of like personal to you, or just like a movie that you really like? What's like your relationship to this movie as a whole, besides trying to recreate it in Barcelona?
I I can't remember when I first saw it, but it was a long time ago. It would have been, yeah, many years ago. And yeah, I think I responded well to it. I loved it because one, the themes resonate with me, which we'll get into later, of just, overreaching. One's ambition is to just get to have a goal that's going to be self-serving, that's going to help you, but then letting the worst instincts come out and take over. And that resonated with me. The filming itself is really well done. It's and I just really loved the setting and the situation. I love the old man, which is John Huston's father, Walter
Yeah.
Huston. I love his character. I've known, I'm from Oklahoma originally, and I've known a lot of old timers kind of like that.
Hmm.
They're they're full of wisdom. They're not educated in the sense that most people think of it, but they're very wise, and they're very good at speaking. They have the gift of the gab, and you want to listen to what they say because they're probably making a good point. And he's like that. And he reminded me of my uncle, who I was like a father to me, actually. And I don't know, it just spoke to me on many levels. And
Hmm.
so I watched it numerous times over the years. I mentioned this earlier to you, but I have a poster, a movie poster of it framed
Hmm.
in my office. And it's funny because it's not a perfect movie, but it's a very good movie. Like,
Hmm.
and so like it's not my favorite movie of all time, but for some reason it speaks to me on many levels. So
Yeah, enough that you want to look at the poster and be reminded of it, uh,
yeah,
when every day when you're
when I'm typing away at my
yeah.
memoir. Yeah.
Um, yeah, it is. I'm trying to think. It is a good movie poster.
Hmm.
On top of being a very good movie, the what's his name, the Howard character who you were speaking about, who sort of reminds you of your uncle and other just sort of old timey kind of guys that we come across, at some point in our lives. I feel like it's kind of his movie, um,
I
and it's
agree.
very hard to steal a movie from Humphrey Bogart, but he kind of manages to do it. He's like really the core like moral guide, and just like really like our entry point into the story as audience members, which I found to be really interesting. And it is super interesting that it's Houston's dad. Was I assume, and like forgive me for my ignorance, I assume that he was a like pretty established actor and like had been acting for years, and that's sort of how Houston got into the industry. But
Yeah, that's
what
correct.
like
Yeah.
okay, so he was around for like years before this.
Yeah, he was around for years and had done theater and done movies. And yeah, I'm not super well knowledgeable about John Huston's biography, but Walter Houston was an actor,
Hmm.
for many years. And it's a lineage, right? Because John Huston's daughter is Angelica Houston, who's a
Hmm.
very well-known, beloved actress. And then her son is also an actor. I'm forgetting his first name, but he's in movies. So
Is that
there's
Jack?
Jack Houston. Yeah. So
Yeah.
there's four generations there. It's a dynasty.
Yeah. And he, yeah, I mean, Houston also did some acting himself. He has
Yes, he did.
an appearance in this movie. Also, I know he's an amazing director, but he has such a presence on screen. Like I wish he just chose to act. Um,
John.
John, yeah,
He's in some movies.
yeah,
Yeah, and he also has a really great voice, and he's
hmm
narrated a lot of documentaries, his own documentaries and other things. So he has just a really commanding, very interesting voice that I love, and we can talk about it later when I get to my recommendations. But
yeah. He's there was like a small part of me, like the one scene that he shows up for, I was like, this guy should be in like every movie. To help, his directing is amazing. Obviously, great writer as well, but his screen presence is just like it's next level. Speaking of screen presence, just so we don't go too long without really talking about it, the bogey of it all, obviously, another main draw of this movie is the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Humphrey Bogart. Um, a as someone who doesn't have like I have like a very limited relationship with Mr. Bogey. I only have seen the big ones: Maltese Falcon, Casablanca. This Casablanca was the last episode that you were on. I was trying to think of
I
what it
know
was.
it's not that I'm like this super bogey super fan or something. I
Yeah,
do like it, but it's funny that I've been on twice and both times Humphrey Bogart movies. But yeah,
yeah. It like it literally just came. I was trying to remember what the movie was, and it just came to me as I was listening to those. But yeah, those are like so. These three movies are really the only ones that I know Humphrey in or have seen him in. Obviously, like know of his sort of like legend as a figure within Hollywood, but this role, this performance is so different than like what we're used to from him. Like it's very different from the like calm, cool, suave Casablanca, Maltese Falcon, or just like all of his other sort of like more notable film noir roles.
hmm
Very, very, very different. Like, what do you think about him sort of playing against type, I guess we can say, in this movie?
yeah. I don't know what he thought about it, but what I'm not sure if he was trying to get some more diversity in his roles or not. But it is a really great depiction of paranoia and just kind of a bad character, someone bad in the sense that he makes poor choices that are going to be harmful to other people. And he's kind of, I wouldn't say villain, but in that direction of a villain.
Hmm
And it's interesting because 2 years later, he stars in Nicholas Ray's In a Lonely Place, and he also plays a bad guy in that movie. And that's a fantastic film, but kind of hard to watch because of how abrasive and
hmm
just how cynical he is. Um, but yeah, one thing that he's known for is just commanding this incredible confidence and swagger. And he's not tall, he's a short man, but he's
hmm
very commanding and very takes up, when he enters a room, you notice, and
Yeah.
he's charismatic. He has this gruff voice that's unmistakable, but he looks so haggard in Treasure of Sierra Madre. He's so beaten down. I mean, they're swinging a pickaxe all day in 100-degree weather in Mexico, trying to get gold out of the side of a mountain. And his beard is overgrown, but it's patchy. It's not a very good beard. It's not like one of those beards where people like oil them and they look nice.
Yeah.
It's like the patchiest beard imaginable. His face is covered in dust and sweat and grime and everything else. So yeah, his hat is. I mean, it's a fedora that's got about 20 holes in it. So like he's looking very very haggard. It is a very different kind of role for him. Not just a villain, but just as a beaten down. Well, I mean, he's homeless. Let's be
hmm
straightforward. He's a homeless man who's down on his luck, trying to find any way to get money and get ahead. And so, when you're homeless, you wear whatever you can get, and your shoes are falling apart, your pants. And so that's the kind of character he is. He's somebody who's he doesn't have a single possession.
Hmm.
Yeah, and that kind of that kind of deprivation of having a stable home, of having a roof over your head, of having a square meal every day will take a toll on your moral character, right? Like it's kind of hard to imagine
Yeah.
anybody living like that, um, being this beacon of moral, hope and
Hmm.
character and so forth. So
Yeah. Okay. You bring up a lot of really interesting points.
I got too
And
far afield, didn't I? I
no,
went
no, no,
jumped ahead.
no, not at all. We can jump all around. The only issue with you bringing up such great points is that I wanted to make a joke about how he's bringing real short king energy in this film. Like Houston is
Is
really highlighting that Bogey is he's like a man of small stature in
yeah,
this film. We typically think about like movie stars being sort of like hidden with the way that they're shot so that they appear to be maybe a little bit bigger or taller than they actually are in real life. But
yeah,
in this movie, Houston's like, nope, this is a small dude. And he kind of like, he has that like, I don't want to say like small dog, like scrappy energy, but you feel that more in this role than you do
for
in
sure.
some of his other roles where he is really calm. Like in Casablanca, like I would have guessed like that's a 6 foot tall guy. That
Yeah,
dude moves with the swagger and confidence of a taller man, of a man who is not worried about his stature impacting his like um place in the world or whatever. And it's like it's a shitty thing, but it is kind of true. Like
hmm
your height does kind of impact the way that you relate to the rest of the world for whatever reason it might be. Um, but
I'm short, by the way. I'm 5'7".
yeah,
So he's like a kindred spirit for me.
you but you don't have that same like you don't have that same energy that he's bringing here. In
No,
this movie he's playing like this sounds so mean. He's playing like shorter. I think he was like 5'8".
oh, I think he might be shorter than that, but maybe
Yeah.
5'8".
He's playing like, like 5'6", 5'5", which isn't to say that, again, I don't want to sound like I'm being heightist or anything like that. I'm like 6'2", uh, just so people know where my privilege and where I'm coming from and all this. I don't want to, I don't want to say punch down. I'm going to get off this topic. You brought up that he is a man who's down on his luck. He's homeless. He's looking for any sort of break that he can get. When we first meet him, he's asking everyone around town for a couple of bucks or whatever it may be. And you brought up that like it's hard for someone, or it's understandable for someone who is in that situation to sort of like maybe not be like morally compromised, but like not necessarily be this beacon of morality that we might hope for all of us to be, which is obviously like a theme that ends up being constant throughout the movie. It's just like this character's sort of moral spiral, his kind of descent into madness, we'll say. Um, but I feel like there are some scenes early on that kind of like call into question where he as a character stands morally and like where he is and like where he progresses. Um, there's specifically that scene where the Bogey character and um, what's his name, Dobbs? Yeah, the Dobbs character and the Curtin character
hmm
meet and beat up a guy who had screwed them over in some sort of deal. Um, I feel like you had thoughts on that scene specifically and like how it ties into that sort of like theme for the rest of the movie.
Yeah. So early in the film, um, Bogey's character, who's his name is Dobbs, he meets another down on his luck guy who doesn't have any money, named Bob Curtin, who is played by Tim Holt, and they decide we need to make some money, and they both end up working for this man who's building oil derricks. And they do all this work, And when it comes time to getting paid, the guy sneaks out on him, doesn't pay this whole labor force. So they work for, imagine doing backbreaking work for 10 or 12 hours a day in 100-degree weather, and then 3 4 weeks later you don't get paid at all. That's what happened. And then they ran into him some days later. They see him in the street, and this guy is obviously a con artist. And um, they he says, let me get you a drink and we'll talk about this. And he buys them a drink in this bar, and out of nowhere, that man, the con artist, tries to, I think he breaks a bottle over Humphrey Bogart's head, or he hits him with the bottle.
Yeah.
And so he throws the first punch. And so I think that's key. Not only does he screw them over, he throws the first punch. So he's not even, he's just a bad guy all around. And so this incredible fight scene breaks out,
Hmm.
uh, that apparently took several days to shoot. But the fight scene breaks out, and in that fight scene, that guy is beating up Bogey and Tim Holt's characters pretty well. But eventually, they get the upper hand and they beat him up, and he's down on the ground. And what they're trying to get is paid for their work, right? So they
Hmm.
get his wallet, and he has a bunch of money in there, of course. So he could have paid them all along.
Hmm.
And they pull out the $300 that they're owed, but there's at least twice that much money still in the wallet. It looked
Yeah.
like there's probably about $1,000 there, and they put all that money back in the wallet and throw it down to him. And then they pay the bar tab. And that scene is really crucial because what it shows is these guys could easily take the whole wallet, because
Hmm.
most people probably would, because he just beat them up, or he just tried to beat them up. He hit them many times. He screwed them over. He's obviously doing this to many other workers all around. He's a bad reputation. They could have easily taken all of his money and probably felt justified in doing it, but they
Hmm.
don't. They just take what they're owed, not a dime more, and then they leave. And then what that shows is they have a moral character, and that they're not criminals, put it that way.
Hmm.
They are people who are down on their luck, and they would like to have money, um, and just survive. They would like to not be on the streets. Later, though, they get involved in mining gold, and that quest for gold gets the better of them and kind of turns them into greedy kind of people.
Hmm.
And so
At
that,
least Dobbs.
yeah,
Yeah.
at least Dobbs, but even the other two kind of succumb to that instinct at times. It doesn't get the better of them, but they you could see it kind of starting to make them paranoid about, um, worried that their money's going to be taken. But it takes over Dobbs completely. Humphrey
Hmm.
Bogart's character.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that it's the gold specifically because, and I'm really happy that you brought up this scene in particular because it's easy once you're sort of in like the second half of this movie or whatever to just think like, okay, this guy has always been this kind of paranoid. He like had all of these traits of paranoia and sort of like immorality, you know, based around his quest for gold and money and status and power and like all the rest. You're just sort of thinking that he like had that in him the whole time. But calling back to that scene early on in the film, like that was not always there. He, like you said, was just trying to survive. He was just, trying to get to the next day. He wasn't like overly greedy or anything. They could have taken all that money from that, shithead businessman. They could have taken all that money and then like spread it around to other people and it would have felt like a justified sort of like Robin Hood kind of
Mm,
gesture or whatever. But they literally just took what they needed. And even from the cut of money that like they took for themselves, paid for their drinks. Like they could have left him to pay for the bar tab,
Yeah.
with what was left, but they had enough character, enough, morality within them to simply just like do what they needed to do to survive, which is, I think kind of like all that any of us are ever trying to do. It's all that, the various characters within this movie are trying to do. They're not like, you know, this movie definitely has a lot of influence on something like There Will Be Blood.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
kind of like the flip side, right? So like where the money and the quest for gold ends up like corrupting Dobbs and to a lesser extent the Howard and Curtin characters. Like it's the gold specifically that corrupts them, where like someone like Daniel Plainview is just like always had that corruption within him. Like he has always had that immorality within him. And like that is what drives him to amass all of um his money and power and all that stuff. So it's kind of like the flip side of what happens in
Yeah.
this movie.
So that word, the word that you're looking for is ambition. So
Hmm.
when we use this word ambition in a positive light, but what it tends to do played out in this way is,
Hmm.
how can I get ahead by any means necessary, almost. And that's the kind of movie that there will be blood is, where it's showing ambition entails stepping on people along the way because that's necessary. I mean, I will say Humphrey Bogart's character, I wouldn't say he's super moral. Like he is very cynical
Hmm.
in a way that is pretty common of film noir movies generally. There is this cynicism that's pervasive in film noir, but he's definitely not greedy in the way that you describe. Um, and there, I think that's an important distinction to make. That there is this cynicism about the economic system, about the opportunity to get ahead. There just isn't a lot of opportunity. I mean, these guys are Americans, but they're in Mexico. They're not even
Hmm.
in the US. They're bumming around Mexico trying to get ahead. And that's a whole interesting detail in and of itself, um, that it's not really examined why they're there. But
Yeah. When does this movie take place? When is
well,
this?
it was it's based on a novel that was written in 1935.
Hmm.
And the novel is written by B. Travin, who is this mysterious. There's a lot of lore about B. Travin. He's this mysterious German who
Hmm.
wound up living after World War One, I believe, living in Mexico and lived there for decades, the rest of his life, and just sort of as this mysterious anonymous character. They don't really know who he is. Supposedly he was an anarchist that was fleeing some kind of repression in Germany and
Hmm.
settled in Mexico. But he wrote a bunch of novels, and this was written in 35. So it was set during the Great Depression, where a lot of
Hmm.
people are out of work looking for any way they can get ahead. So I think that's important to think about, is this is set during the Great Depression, where the
Yeah.
economics situation was bad worldwide.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like I'd read somewhere that um someone asserting that it took place in like 25, which didn't really totally make sense. Like it feels more, these feel more like depression era kind of sort of like characters and situations that people would find themselves in, rather than um
Mm-hmm.
a 20s kind of situation. Like why would you leave the states where everything is apparently pretty dandy to go look for gold in Mexico? So depression era does make a bit more sense. You mentioned that it's not really examined why they are in Mexico, or like what that sort of like means for the story as a whole. Do you have any thoughts about sort of like, or like, how do you interpret that? How are you reading that? Whether or not it is like deliberately there, or the intention of, Houston and the other filmmakers here.
Yeah, this is the part that makes me a little uncomfortable watching it today is
Mhm.
this is the part that is not easy to defend at all, because the optics are bad for white American dudes to show up to Mexico and take all the gold and bring it
Yeah.
back. but like they don't get the gold in the end. So
Yeah.
that's part of the sort of lesson is it was a foolhardy scheme that doesn't pan out in the end.
Mhm.
Pan out, it would be a reference to gold, pun intended
Yeah, there we go.
there. uh, but yeah, like it is a little bit of a strange idea to show up to a place and extract their minerals and leave with your pocket full of gold. But I think the movie handles that pretty well, though. The movie is interrogating that, and so on some level, if you're able to watch it
Mhm.
clearly, and because I mean, it doesn't. The characters don't critique what they're doing, but the modern viewer would be invited to critique what they're doing and see it that way, um, just by the sheer fact of it not working out. And um, but um, that extractive relationship is sort of what happens. There's a lot of
Mhm.
mining happening all around the world that ends up going toward the Western world. So it is kind of a microcosm of that.
Yeah. It is interesting though that like it doesn't work out for them and like the gold kind of just like ends up like back in the mountain in a weird way. So like the it's kind of like cyclical, like the just like the gold story specifically. It's not that it necessarily like ends up with um that like that town of like indigenous villagers or whatever. Like it just like goes back into the land, which I don't know that the movie is like necessarily trying to like get at a point of like like this is all like as humans like we're like mining the earth or whatever for all these minerals for like our own gain, but like it is like of the earth and like for the earth to like be here, um not not for white Americans or indigenous Mexicans or whatever, just like for the land. That was kind of like my reading of it. I don't know that that's necessarily the point of the movie, but I feel like there is an aspect or an element of this movie that is like about like respecting Mother Nature and like the force that it is and can be. And when we try to like overstep those bounds, it will come back to bite us in the ass.
Yeah, I agree. And there's a couple of scenes that really emphasize that in the movie.
Mhm.
And both of those involve Howard, Walter Houston. Um, and so the first one is after they finish their mining. So they've been up there mining. So just to back up,
Mhm.
it's Dobbs, who's Humphrey Bogart, Howard, who is Walter Houston, and Tim Holt plays Bob Curtin. These three are setting up this mining operation on this remote mountain, really far away from any civilization, any cities or towns. And after a quite a long time of being up there, they are deciding that they're not finding enough. They've kind of hit the bottoms of the reserve of gold. They're ready to head down back to civilization. They're done.
Mhm.
And as they leave, as they're about to leave, Howard says, "Hey, before we leave, we need to put this thing back together. We need to undo what we had done," because they had chopped down trees and built these chutes where you would send water down this chute and
Mhm.
pan for gold. It's a whole operation. It's a whole setup, and they kind of laugh about it. But then what's interesting about it is they laugh about it, but then they say, "All right, let's do it." And so it's like within the space of about 5 seconds, they go from laughing about it to just, all right, even if they're sort of cynical about it. And
Mhm.
so they undo all of this. They set it up, leave no trace kind of idea. They hide any evidence of that they've done anything there.
Hmm.
And then and the way that Howard tells them to do it, it's not just to leave no trace so they don't get caught. He says, do you remember what he says? He says something
I
like,
can't remember the line specifically.
this this mountain has just given us all this treasure. The least we can do is set her right again, or something like that. And he
Yeah.
uses the pronoun her, like, so
Yeah.
he's feminizing this mountain. And then they do that, and then as they're leaving, Howard's like, "Bye, mountain, thank you," or something like that. And
Yeah.
then they each thank the mountain, and
Yeah.
it's kind of a corny but poignant moment, honestly. And then later,
Yeah.
whenever the fast forward toward the end of the movie, what's happened is Bogart has um, taken off with all the gold. It's a long story, but taken off with all the gold and killed. Spoiler. And the bandits who had taken all his gold think it's sand, and they dump it out because it's weighing down the burros that they've taken.
Mhm.
And lo and behold, this windstorm comes out of nowhere, which feels implausible. But if you're looking at this movie not from a realism standpoint, but from an allegorical standpoint, it makes
Mhm.
perfect sense that a windstorm would kick up immediately and blow all this gold away, which, like you said, just scatters to the winds and scatters
Yeah.
back to the earth. And so I think the author very much is not working within the mode of realism. He's working in an allegorical mode, like a fable.
Mhm.
And so I think he is very, very interested in seeing how there's an attempt to right the, to correct the harms. Mining is damage to the earth, right?
Mhm.
You're knocking holes in the side of the earth. There's a lot of water usage. There's a lot of chemicals these days used that contaminate the earth. But mining is an invasive process on the earth itself. But Howard is trying to undo the damage, and then the
Mhm.
wind is an expression of the earth itself. So I think it's a really good point to make.
Yeah. I love that. I love um both of those scenes, especially the one of like Howard having them, return the mountain to to the state that it was in before.
It's a
There
very
is
quaint scene, I think.
yeah, there's like there's an element of just like respect, I think, for the not like imposing geography, but like the mountain itself is like pretty imposing. The geography of the movie is like it's pretty harsh. Like it's hot. They're always like the sun is always beating down on them and stuff. There's that moment where they're like initially climbing the mountain, and Howard is like you know steps ahead of Curtin and Dobbs. Like, and again, he's the character who has like the deepest connection to the land, to to the earth, to the geography of the space. And like the two of them don't really respect it. And because they're not respecting it, it kicks their ass. So I just thought that was like a really interesting thing that's kind of like that's definitely prevalent like throughout the entire movie. For sure.
Agreed. And just to say a thing about that scene you're talking about. So Walter Houston is almost twice maybe not twice the age, but he's much older than these other two characters. And they think he's this feeble old man, but as you
Mhm.
point out, he's like doing laps around these guys.
Yeah.
Like he's like not even winded in the slightest. He's and Dobbs makes the joke, "Oh, I think he's part billy goat."
Yeah.
And then later he says he might be part camel too because he hasn't had a drink of water in
Yeah.
several hours. And they're over there like on the ground like
Yeah,
suffering.
they're doubled over.
They can't take another step. It's
Yeah.
a funny part actually. There is some humor in this movie. And Walter Houston is just hilarious in general. Like his whole way of talking, it just reminds me, like I said, of old timers I would see my whole life in Oklahoma. They're just talking a lot. They have an opinion on everything.
Yeah.
um,
And I mean, just like a deep wisdom that
yeah, yeah,
um And like you were saying, they're not educated in the way that we would like. They're not like academically educated or whatever, but they know they're just like so full of knowledge and
Personal experiences and things.
yeah.
Eh, one
And
thing
it's
we
easy. Oh,
oh
go
no,
for it.
go ahead. No, I was going to say something off the subject.
Oh
Go
no, I
ahead.
was just gonna say that like like the Dobbs and to a lesser extent the Curtin character, like you meet that and with a little bit of oh whatever, like what does this old guy know? Like, we're gonna get our gold and we're gonna be good. And we're just gonna use this guy instead of like fully like taking the time to like sit and listen to what it is that he has to say and like soak in that wisdom. Cause then maybe you could also uh scale the mountain like a billy goat camel or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. The movie is trying to, in the book, I'm sure, is trying to poke holes in kind of youthful arrogance. Like when people are young, they tend to write off and dismiss older people as they don't know what's they don't know what's up. They don't really understand what we care about. When they don't realize is these older people probably went through similar experiences numerous times
Hmm.
because things aren't, every moment in history things play out over and over and over in similar ways. It's not like you're in uncharted territory at any point in history.
Hmm.
Human dynamics are pretty universal and they repeat over and over and over. And so that's where his wisdom comes from. He has had the gold sickness. That's why he's warns them. He says at one point he says before they even start mining the gold, when they just propose the idea of going up there, he says, what does he say? I know what gold does to men's souls. And he basically is giving them a warning, which ends up being kind of a foreshadowing that
Hmm.
it corrupts men's souls. That's the point. But he says, I know because it's happened to me. And so he managed to survive the way it's portrayed is it's like an illness, but what it really is the spiritual illness
Hmm.
of just caring only about materiality and possessions and wealth and status over what you could call morality, being good, doing good things, helping the poor, that sort of thing. So
Hmm.
he is this. I agree. This kind of moral center of the film,
Yeah.
and the intelligence center of the film too. Um, what I was going to say earlier, this is just a point that I wanted to make earlier, is this is one of the earliest films where in Hollywood that was shot on location. It wasn't common in the
Hmm.
40s to make films on location. They were made in studios. Even Casablanca was shot entirely, almost entirely in the studio. I think there was some scenes shot in France. There's a couple of location scenes, but um, this film was the interiors were shot on a studio in Hollywood, but the exteriors were shot there in Mexico near Tampico,
Hmm.
which is where it's set. Well, in Tampico and outside in the wilderness.
Yeah. That's interesting. And again, like we were saying with the whole like relationship that this movie has to nature, the land, the geography of the movie, um, it's hard to get that if you're shooting on a set, on a sound stage or whatever. So I do think that it is like really impactful for like how we read the movie, maybe probably more so on like a subconscious level than anything else, but like it is something that we are like picking up and absorbing as audience members. The last thing that I just wanted to quickly point out on this whole topic of the geography of the movie and everything is like the title of the movie itself. Where it is that they are looking for the gold, and I think you mentioned that uh, the the Howard character refers to the mountain as her, but like it's called Sierra Madre. This is the mother mountain or the mother mountain range. Uh,
Mm,
like it's
that's a good point.
right, like it's very much so hammering home that point of Mother Nature of you know a again something that is like that is big and impressive, and I don't want to say imposing, but like is something that we should respect and like revere in for all that it is, all that it does, all that it provides to us. And when you don't do that, then you might end up losing all your gold. So we've been talking about it's been kind of like sprinkled through the conversation throughout, but just like this whole idea of the gold of new money, we'll call it, really like corrupting and changing or changing the sort of like morality of the characters and specifically Dobbs. Is there anything more that you wanted to like dive into on that theme specifically and like how it plays out as sort of like the central theme of this movie, the central like thesis really of this movie?
Just what comes to mind is that there were a lot of movies around this time in the late 40s that were trying to make a similar um, point
Mhm,
in their depictions of the quest for money, that um, that poverty drives crime, and whenever poverty drives crime, it debases people's souls, it makes them make bad choices, it makes them make immoral choices. And then the counterpoint of that, or not the counterpoint but a secondary point, is that in the pursuit of money, especially if you're
mhm,
coming from the bottom and you're trying to get, but at any point really, the pursuit of money encourages people to downplay their moral guardrails and make choices that they wouldn't make in the quest for money. And so like there's a whole tendency or a whole movement of film noir movies called, it's been called film gris,
mhm,
GRIS. And these are socially conscious film noir movies. And we've covered 4 or 5 of them on our podcast. And this
mhm,
is a similar theme where someone who's a good person decides, I'm had it, I'm tired of being poor, I'm going to rob somebody or do something like that, that you can't imagine them doing, but they've hit rock bottom, morally speaking, and
mhm,
materially speaking. They just don't have any money. And so, yeah, that theme is explored here. But what I guess what's different about it here is it's not just talking about criminality. It's just talking about the the quest for incredible wealth. When you know that if you keep going in this direction, you're going to get rich,
mhm,
that temptation is hard to resist, and people will not stop, like, and you see this kind of thing happening in casinos too. So it's kind of critiquing that kind of thing, where if I just put in another $10 bill at this slot machine, I'll finally hit jackpot, and you just keep going, you keep going,
yeah,
and you never stop. And that's kind of what Howard's character is saying. He even says, um, "You won't stop, and you won't stop until you lose everything." Or so he doesn't say it like that, but
mhm,
there's a point where they're talking about it, and Bogey's like, "Oh, I would stop after 5,000 or something like that. After getting $5,000 worth of gold or
yeah,
something like that." And Howard laughs. He's like, "I doubt it. Like, it's really hard to stop once you're raking it in like that."
yeah.
That's when he says it does something to your soul, and
There's
it makes you insatiable. It makes you greedy. It makes you want more and more and more. And if you think about it, like,
but it's the idea of like once you have a little bit that you then want more. Not necessarily that like because you've had nothing, your quest to amass some means that you're on a quest to amass all of it. It's like more so the once you've tasted a little bit of it, then that's when like the corruption or like what I'm gonna call like the curse of like a little bit of money, then like that's when it kicks in. Right. That's
but it could also be a lot of money. I mean,
mhm,
very seldom does somebody's reach $1 billion and like, oh, I've got $1 billion, I'm done. I'm not going to make
Yeah,
any
well, that's what I mean
money.
by a little, like, right, there's a sweet spot. So like when they first get their money back from the shitty business guy in the beginning, right? Like they like have enough, and there is a like satisfaction with like having enough to survive and get by. But then once you have tasted like, oh, I'm like a little rich, then you get to
Right.
the point where you're like, okay, now I want to be like really, really, really fucking rich.
Hit the next tier and the next tier and the next tier.
Yeah, you don't. You sort of like there's the tier of like being comfortable, and once you sort of like leave that tier and you're like, okay, I'm a little rich. Like very rarely does that satisfy you in the same way that just like comfortability does. I think is
Right.
kind of like
Yeah.
um what this movie is getting at, and like sort of what we're saying now about that quest.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's the quest itself that that like changes them. I think it's once Dobbs has that taste of, oh, I'm kind of rich now.
Yeah.
This feels good. Yeah.
Right. Because there's a moment where he's like, 25,000, that's small potatoes or something. And a few months before, he didn't have 2 pesos to his name.
Yeah,
And suddenly,
he couldn't buy a cigarette.
right, and suddenly $25,000 is nothing to him.
Hmm.
So yeah, you're right. I think that's correct.
And then also once he, once they have the gold, and there's the Cody character who comes in, and who we haven't really spoken about him at all, but like a very, very, very interesting dynamic where he comes in and he lays out like three options for like how they can approach the situation. He's like, you can either kill me, you could send me off, and if you send me off, then like I'm just gonna send a bunch of people up here to get you guys, or you cut me in on the action. And he's not even like cut me in on the action that you guys have already mined out of the ground, just cut me in on any future earnings, which to like most sensible people, like, yeah, take that third option, that's totally fine, like come along for the ride, buddy. And Dobbs is like, absolutely not. Why would we why would we share our future potential earnings with this guy when we can just like divvy that up amongst ourselves? And then eventually that character ends up dying, and I think Curtin is like, we should send some money to his widow and kids. And again, Dobbs is like, absolutely not. But again, if we had asked Dobbs from the bar scene earlier in the movie, I'm sure he would have been like, yeah, that totally makes sense. So there is like a fundamental like switch that happens within him once he actually has that gold in his possession.
Yeah. What's disturbing about that scene, and they're deciding what to do with this guy, is they all three decide they're going to kill him, though. But just in that moment, what saves the Howard and what's his name, Curtin. What saves their more moral compass, um, the integrity of their moral compass. What saves it from them crossing the line and actually killing him is that these bandits show up and there's a shootout and the guy dies anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But they were gonna be like, they were on board with killing.
Yeah.
At first they were like, no, let's cut him in, but they were persuaded pretty quickly to just let's do it. And I was surprised
Yeah.
on rewatch that they were down. But what's weird about them is that they have this moral center about money, but they don't have any qualms about killing people. Because there's
Yeah.
a few times when they're like in shootouts and they just casually kill many people and don't even blink an eye.
Yeah. I was gonna say
So
something awful, but we don't have to.
okay.
I don't have to make my bandits joke.
Okay.
Yeah, but it is interesting that like um, they're just like, yeah, whatever. Let's blast away.
Yeah.
Um, speaking of the bandits, I know we spoke briefly about just like the dynamic of like them being Americans who travel to Mexico to extract the resources to then take it back to the States and be rich there. But what do you think specifically of the bandits? I know we spoke briefly about the famous line that has lived on throughout film history for the last 60, 70 years, and has been referenced time and time again. But what do you think about the bandits and just sort of like how they come into the picture?
Um, yeah, I think without knowing any, if a viewer is just watching this and doesn't know anything about Mexican history or who the bandits are and what they're trying to do and any of that stuff, they just seem like this funny, interesting, quaint. I don't know, not quaint, but like just this
Hmm.
criminal element that's going around terrorizing for no reason. And later in that scene, the federales
Hmm.
show up, which is the Mexican military or the I don't know, the federal police or whatever they are. They
Hmm.
show up and they're chasing the bandits, and so they're happy to, you know, these three white miners are happy to see the federales chase off these bandits, um, which is interesting because they're also kind of squatting on this mountain. They didn't get a permit, so they're not legally there mining. So they're, in a sense, they're bandits as well.
Yeah.
um, but I don't have a ton to say about the bandits except that it's just an interesting dynamic that's not really examined very closely in the film. But there were revolutionary bandits at that time. There were people who were trying to um, essentially overtake the state and create this better state. So there's not just one type of bandit. There were Pancho Villa was a
Hmm.
bandit who was trying to fight on behalf of the people and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of things about that history that are worth looking into. I I think that it is a interesting thing that these three miners are happy to see the federales when they could just as easily be arrested,
Hmm.
but they're up on top of the mountain looking down in the valley, so they're not seen by anybody. But that's
Yeah,
not.
it's an interesting thing that's just sort of like, I mean, I don't have like a ton of knowledge about like Mexican history, like definitely not at the time that this movie takes place, but that is an interesting thing that's just sort of like hanging around in the background. I think there's one line, I think it might have been Cody, where he's like, I really like the way that they do it down here. Like if they catch you doing something, they tell you to dig a hole, and then you're in it like before like the shovel like hits the dirt or something, like something kind of crazy where she's just like, yeah, the federales, they're ruthless, and I that's what I like. I dig it down here. um I didn't know like if there was any like larger sort of context that I was missing, but it did feel like one of those like throwaway lines that has like just like endless amounts of like context that if you have it like means like a really 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 different thing than someone who just like catches it as a throwaway or whatever.
Yeah, the 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 whole bandit, and again, I'm not a historian or an expert on this, but there is another way to look at the bandits as this liberatory force
Hmm.
trying to push back against this authoritarian government. And there's different types of bandits, like I was saying. The way that these are portrayed is they're just robbing any old person that comes along. They have no scruples. They're just a criminal element. They're like
Hmm.
a criminal gang and nothing more, nothing less. So in that sense, they're not doing anything good whatsoever. But in real life, there were these sort of these groups that were called bandidos, who were kind of a revolutionary force that were trying to liberate and help the poor and so forth, kind of
Hmm.
like. And so there is this whole, by the way, there's this whole group of films made in Italy, these spaghetti westerns that
Hmm.
a lot of people haven't seen. But they're actually they're Western films. So there are movies that are about this early 18 or this early 1900s, a revolutionary period where they're showing these bandits in a positive light. And there's one called A Bullet for the General,
Hmm.
and it has Klaus Kinski, the German actor, and there's a bunch of these spaghetti westerns that are about bandits, but the bandits are the good guys. And
Interesting.
there's several of these films, and they were made in the 60s and
Yeah.
70s. Anyway, it's worth looking into.
Yeah, for sure. I think we all know the big ones, but have like failed to dive into to
And
anything beyond, Good, the
well,
Bad, the Ugly, and Once Upon a Time in the West.
these are different than those because in
Hmm.
those these are specifically about Emiliano Zapata and these revolutionary bandits. So it's a very micro focus, and it's a
Yeah.
series of these. Anyway, it's an interesting group of films.
On the topic of spaghetti westerns, would you classify this film as a western? Does it have the elements and um, calling cards or whatever of the genre? I feel like we as a society are so obsessed with classifying things, but so many things exist just like outside of typical genre norms. But I am interested to hear if you think that we could classify this as a western.
Yeah, yeah. I think you could call it like a neo-Western because it
Hmm.
doesn't take place in the 1800s when we associate the Western genre taking place. But yeah, I think you could call it a neo-Western because it has many of the same themes. It's set outside of the city in this rugged terrain. Uh, it's got bandits, it's got
Hmm.
federales, uh, it's got a moral messaging, which is typically something you see strongly shown in westerns. You have some criminal element and you have some moral force, and they're at odds, and they're trying to work out some new rules based
Yeah,
order on the frontier. Yeah, so I think I would be comfortable calling this like a neo western. Yeah, for sure.
and you've got shootouts.
And you've got a lot of shootouts,
Yeah,
including one from a moving train, which is
yeah.
pretty interesting.
I forgot
Uh,
about the train one. Yeah. Um,
that's
every
where they're
movie
just like,
should have a
it,
train.
that's where they're just shooting bandits and not even thinking twice about it. It's like no big deal.
Yeah.
Like I would
um,
be pondering that for a moment if I ended up doing that.
yeah. I think if we found ourselves in the scenario, I think we would handle it quite differently than
Oh,
our characters
of
did,
course,
in
of
in a,
course.
in a lot of ways, including questioning just blindly shooting at bandits, but also just you know how we would approach the search for gold and the quest for gold. Yeah, I guess you could call it like I like neo western. I like I guess also kind of an adventure, but it is really I think that this is like a pretty uniquely unique and singular kind of movie, especially within the time that it was being made. I don't know that there was a whole lot coming out around this time that was like this. I also don't know what the do you happen to know like what the initial reaction was from like audiences? I think um oh my god, why am I forgetting John Huston's dad's name?
Walter,
Walter
Walter.
Huston. I think he won an Oscar for supporting actor for this. So it seemed to have been like pretty
It,
well received.
yeah, it was a commercial success and a critical success. It was well received. And one sad little tidbit of history is that Walter Houston died just 2 years later, in 1950, of an aneurysm. So he this was like it wasn't his last film, but it was one of his
Hmm.
last films, and
Yeah.
so he was in a lot of movies, but this is really one where he shines. Like I do think he steals the show here. Like
Oh
he
yeah.
and so he died right after that. So um, and um, oh, I was going to say this before I forget that movies that interrogate excessive greed and that this kind of thing on
Hmm.
screen became very rare to see in Hollywood shortly after this, because this is when, and this ties into our podcast, but this is
Yeah.
when they were blacklisting a lot of directors right around this time, and they were bringing them up they were having these House Un-American Activities Committee hearings and bringing like Hollywood actors and screenwriters and directors up to testify, and some of them went to federal prison for not testifying, the Hollywood 10. But
Hmm.
shortly thereafter, the studios were too paranoid and too nervous to allow films like this to even be made. So you saw this turn in the 50s where you just didn't see this level of didacticism, this level of messaging
Hmm.
going on in this way for a while. And that was a big reason why.
Yeah.
And in fact, Houston himself, John Huston, he left 2 years. Well, in 1952, he moved to Ireland, and the reason why he said he left was he couldn't stand these witch hunts and these
Hmm.
um, clamping down on freedom of expression. And he said that there was this moral rot happening in the U.S. because of these HUAC hearings in the McCarthy era, and so he left. He was like, I'm done with the United States, and he went to Ireland. And so that's an interesting footnote, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, right, we were talking about how this movie definitely, you can see the influence in something like There Will Be Blood. I think PTA said specifically that he was like watching this movie on repeat while he was writing
Oh,
and making There Will Be Blood. Like it was like definitely a big influence. So like we have seen movies in maybe the last like 20 to 30 years that are more comfortable with examining uh this kind of greed and like what it does to us, or like how it can um sort of like manifest in our actions and stuff. But it's really interesting that there was definitely, and like also makes sense that there was a period of time where we were not seeing a lot of movies like this, but like when this movie came out, that it was successful with both audiences, critics, all that stuff. But then there was like no room for something like this to exist within Hollywood filmmaking for, 10, 15, 20, maybe 30 years or so. Um, which I think like makes the impact, right? The reason for this movie being essential, it it strengthens that sort of that argument for sure, that like this movie was received the way that it was received. But then we didn't get a lot like it, so it kind of like stood alone for a while, and then years later influenced a lot of filmmakers to tackle similar ideas for sure.
hmm well, there was an explosion in the 60s of really critical films. Once the blacklist kind of went away, it
Hmm.
sort of went away around 1960. And there was this, and then the Hays Code sort of went away. And once that went away, you saw this real experimentation in film, and people could kind of do whatever they wanted as long as they could get the funding for the film, which is a whole other problem. But so yeah, it was a. I agree. It's singular. It does stand out as being an important film that came right in a crucial point in history, that it might not have been made 5 years earlier or 5 years later, but it was a good confluence of factors that came together right when it was made. And Houston was kind of on the top of his game there. I mean, he's
Hmm.
made a lot of good films before and since, but he did a fantastic job there of direction, and the actors were really convincing to me. I mean,
Yeah,
performances are excellent.
absolutely. It's yeah, everything definitely came together kind of perfectly for this movie to, to be what it is. Very thankful that it exists. I'm happy that I got to see it. I'm happy to learn that it is much more than just the "we don't need no stinking badges" reference.
And that line is like not even that big of a deal to me, but it's funny that that's the thing that everybody knows it for.
Yeah. Uh, um, but yeah, it is really weird. It is like a super, fun line, but it's just like there's so much more to this movie than that moment. And like I was like, while I was watching it, I was like, maybe that line will come up like towards the end of the movie, maybe, and like that's why it has like the impact. But it's kind of just like in the middle. It's a lot of fun, but then there's like so much else that's going on and like happens after um after that line. Um but yeah,
Yeah.
I guess we just love like Mexican accents or something.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure how, and most people misquote the line when they quote the line. I'm not sure how that became like a myth, sort of a mythical line, but yeah,
Yeah.
I forgot it was even in this movie until when I was watching it and it came up. I was like, oh, there's that
Yeah.
line.
And it's it's funny for sure because it's like three sentences. He's like, badges. I don't have to show you anything. We don't have to show you badges. I don't have to show you no stinking badges. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. He got there. It took him 3 sentences, but he got there.
He got there.
Uh, Amazing. Well, Jason, this has been a great conversation about a great movie. Thank you for joining and once again for sharing all of your insight about this movie and just like film history and in general. If you don't have anything else to say um, about the Sierra Madre and its treasure, I think we can do some recommendations.
Yeah, I think we covered everything I wanted to say. Yeah, I really appreciate it again. It was fun talking about this and fun revisiting this. So yeah, let's do some recommendations.
Let's do it. We didn't get a picture of your or you're not in your office right now, so we can't see the poster, but
Oh,
we all know that it's around somewhere.
yeah, my office has bad. The lighting interferes with the video. So anyway, yeah, it's not a good place to do a video.
All good. So we'll do some recommendations um, for uh, for this flick. I'll just quickly go through the rules. I know most of our listeners know, but just in case, we're going to recommend 3 things each for things that folks should check out if they like treasure of the Sierra Madre. Of those 3 things, one has to be another movie. The other 2 can be any and everything else: more movies, books, TV shows, albums, museums, really whatever.
Mhm.
Any movies that we recommend can't be in the canon. So, unfortunately, no, there will be blood, but everything else is totally fair game. So, Jason, you can give your first one, brief overview for why you're recommending it, or brief overview, and then the what it is that you're recommending, and then we'll just ping pong back and forth until we both have our 3.
Okay, I am going to recommend another John Huston film that was made later called The Misfits. It's not on your canon, is it?
Does
So,
not.
The Misfits is, I had never made the time to see it until recently, but it is this really fascinating, just actually unbelievable film that I can't believe was ever made. I mean, it's Clark Gable is in it, and he has a heart attack and dies 2 days after they finish shooting it.
Wow.
Or like Marilyn Monroe is in it, and it's
Yeah.
her. She died right after making this. Montgomery Clift is in it, and he dies shortly thereafter. And
Jesus.
and Thelma Ritter is in it, and she's great. She's in Rear Window. She's a funny actress. And
Hmm.
anyway, it's got an all-star cast. It's written by Arthur Miller. It's a fantastic movie. It's a little bit cringy to watch some of the gender dynamics, and it's a little bit hard to watch some of the animal cruelty, to be honest.
Hmm.
Um, they're roping these horses and it's hard to watch, but it's an unbelievable film that I really recommend. 1961, The Misfits, and the punk band named themselves after this
Nice.
movie.
Um, okay. I think, yeah, I got to check that out. I like that.
John Huston.
Yeah. Good stuff. I am going to go with something a little bit more contemporary. I think all of my recommendations are a bit more contemporary, but the first one, I'm going to recommend a movie that is also about people who find themselves with a lot of new money, and there's a lot of paranoia around said new money, a lot of um, backstabbing, and just the dynamics of like how they all try to keep and amass more money that they have found themselves in. Um, I think I don't know that it is like specifically drawing from this movie, but the I think that connection point is certainly there. I'm kind of surprised it's not in the canon, but I'm recommending David Fincher's The Social Network.
I've never seen it, believe it
Oh
or not. And I know it's good. Everybody
yeah,
says it's good. I just haven't seen it for some reason.
it's interesting because it feels like it's like one of the like quintessential like 21st century movies. Like
Right.
obviously like Facebook is so ubiquitous in our lives, so like
Mhm.
it feels like everyone has seen that movie, but it is pretty. It's like as good as people say it is. It's a really good watch.
You'd be surprised how many movies I haven't seen that everybody's seen.
Yeah,
I'm known for watching all these obscure movies from like 100 years ago or
yeah,
80 years ago, but haven't seen the most common things in the
yeah.
world.
Well, someone's got to watch those older movies so you can
Right.
tell the rest of us about it.
I can dust them off but no, I need to see it. I need to see it, and it's going on my list. It's going toward the top of my list, and I will get to it soon. Um, uh, should I go for my next?
Yeah, go for
Okay.
it.
This is one I also recently watched in preparation for this podcast, and I was astonished by how good it was. So it's a documentary called Let There Will Be Light from 1946, made by John Huston. It was censored until 1981. So John Huston was commissioned to make, well, he made four films about World War II. He was in World War II. He was a soldier, but he made four films, but three propaganda films
Hmm.
about different things that the military commissioned, and this is the third of those three. And what it's about is it's filmed in the United States at a hospital, like uh, a military hospital, I guess. And it's about these soldiers who come back from the war and they have PTSD and they're undergoing treatment to get better so they can reintegrate.
Hmm.
But it's so beautifully done, and the men that they show are very sensitive. They just want to come home and see their family and their loved ones, and the doctors and the hospital staff are incredibly sensitive and kind and gentle. And it's just like I was expecting to see something like, I don't know. I don't know if you've ever seen Titicate Follies, the Frederick Wiseman film, and it's set in a mental institution, a mental hospital, and it's really hard to watch because
Hmm.
the patients are, you know, having outbursts, and the staff are not very good and
Hmm.
not helping things very well.
Yeah,
So it's like almost like a horror film. It's nothing like that. This film is called Let There Be Light, and it's very sensitive depiction of how a hospital staff can kind of help these men overcome these difficulties. And it's just a beautiful piece of film. It's about an hour long. It's streamable, and that's my second
yeah,
recommendation.
awesome. I like that. I love these recs. I like how we're going to be going back and forth on
Yeah.
on what it is that we're recommending.
Right.
I'm going to recommend another movie from the 21st century that is probably I would I think I'm going to guess that you haven't seen this one, but it is also a movie about how finding some treasure can um, literally curse the people who end up finding it. Sort of in similar ways that the gold that our characters here, it ends up cursing them in a in a way. But this movie is about a literal curse from the treasure that is found. I'm going with the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, The Curse of the Black Pearl. Um,
Oh, I have seen it actually.
hell yeah.
Nice, nice. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good recommendation.
Uh, would
Nice.
would be an interesting double feature, but I think it could be fun.
Yeah, that's a good recommendation. I haven't seen it in forever. Um,
They're good. The first two at least are just like very, very, very solid pieces of um easy popcorn cinema,
right.
but like
Yeah.
very, very, very effective in what it is that they're doing.
I was thinking about recommending a bullet for the general because I had mentioned it earlier, but since you've got me thinking about movies that are tapping into greed,
Yeah.
and I'm going to recommend Martin Scorsese's Casino from
Oh,
1995.
nice.
Iconic movie. It's overshadowed by Goodfellas, which
Mm,
is obviously fantastic, and it's also about greed. But I think because everybody's seen Goodfellas, not enough people have seen Casino. That's
mhm.
going to be my third rec, and I need to rewatch it. It's been quite some time since I've seen it, but it's like 3 hours long, so you have to
Yeah.
be you have to be in the mood to sit for 3 hours.
Yeah. I love that. Great movie. Also about gold in the desert.
Exactly.
Vegas. Yeah. I love that.
Gold and cash and chips and treachery and murder and all
Yeah.
kinds of things.
All all that good stuff. Could we call that a neo-western? Maybe.
That's interesting. I'll have to rewatch it and I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah. I love that. I'm a big Scorsese guy. I thought you were gonna when you were saying his name, I thought you were gonna go with Killers of the Flower Moon, which
Oh yeah,
is a
good.
movie that I've recommended probably like 8 times on the show because it's amazing. And we haven't done Screenage Wasteland has not we haven't voted on our 2023 Canon movies, but I will be campaigning hard for Killers of the Flower Moon to make it because I think that is, I understand Oppenheimer was the movie that sort of like everyone got swept up in, but I think Killers was like far and away the best movie of that year and probably of the last like 5 years, maybe decade. Uh,
Yeah, I would agree. It's a fantastic. If you do cover that, I would love to come on and talk about it because remember, I'm from Oklahoma
yeah.
and that's set in Oklahoma in Osage County. And I actually, my first public article that I ever wrote was about those murders.
Oh wow.
And that was before the book came out that
Yeah.
the film was based on. And I know a lot about that subject because I have a good friend who's Osage, the tribe that was targeted.
Yeah.
And he's the one who told me about it. And so that's my first published piece was in 2013, and it was about those murders.
Wow.
And then that book came out a few years later.
Yeah. Please
Uh,
send that to me. I would love to read that. I read the book like a month ago. And I'm happy I read it after watching the movie because
yeah.
I'm just like I'm totally in the bag for Marty, so like anything that he does I'm gonna love. But I enjoyed reading it after and then like understanding like what it was from the book that he was pulling to tell the story. Because I think a lot of people who read the book first were like upset that he didn't do like a one for one copy and instead like pulled what he needed in order to make a particular kind of movie.
And I think the movie is better for it, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a fantastic movie. Yeah. I hope it makes it onto your list later.
Yeah. I would love that. Um okay, I'm gonna take a really weird detour now. I'm gonna tie it back. So you mentioned that that this article that was first published was in like 2013. Um I'm gonna I don't know. I don't know if you were big in the hip hop scene in 2013, 2014, but there was a one hit wonder that came out around this time. I was in college, so I was like prime for this kind of like shitty rap, and like party hip hop or whatever. Uh, so this is going to be a recommendation that like not a lot of people know, or if you like didn't know it at the time and like visit it now, you would be like, "What the hell is this guy talking about?" But I'm going to recommend a single song from a dude named Trinidad James called "All Gold Everything" because as I was watching this movie, I was like, I need to tie in something that is just about gold. So why not this song, All Gold Everything? Super silly, but like was a ton of fun when I was, 21 years old or whatever. Uh, and
I
that is my final recommendation. Very
Nice.
far from the heights of like these beautiful John Huston movies and like Martin Scorsese, telling stories about these awful murders of the Osage people. Let's have a little bit fun. Listen to a song that's about gold everywhere.
Yeah, I'm looking up the image now, and he has a lot of gold chains.
Yeah.
I'm impressed. That has to be heavy.
Yeah. He does have all gold everything.
I went to Dubai a little while back, and I went to this famous gold market, and you walk in and you can see these, there's women's dresses that are essentially made of gold. Like we drape this whole thing over you.
Yeah.
It's made of woven gold. It's wild. Anyway, I'm not a gold fan myself, but
Yeah. Although is that your wedding ring is gold. Your wedding
it's
band is
white.
gold.
It's white gold.
Nice.
So it
Uh
looks like silver, but it
yeah.
is gold.
I've got a tiny little gold chain that I wear. Um
Nice.
but very, very, very minimal.
Keeping it
And
keeping it classy.
yeah, a minimal amount of gold, not all gold everything. Trinidad James and Dobbs would both be disappointed with our lack of gold for sure.
There's still time.
Yeah, there is still time. Very true. Um, well, amazing recommendations. Jason, again, an amazing conversation about this movie. Thank you so much for joining. An absolutely great conversation. Before we get out of here, in case anyone is interested in listening to the show or finding any of your writings, where can folks find you online?
I have a website, and it's jasonchristianwrites.com. We bought the domain for Cold War Cinema Pod, but we haven't built the website. We're going to build a website for our podcast soon, but the podcast is accessible on my website or everywhere you look for podcasts. It's just called Cold War Cinema. Yeah.
Awesome.
And
Yeah.
if you want to follow me on Letterboxd, my Letterboxd handle is Exile Magic.
Amazing. I love it. A very good follow on Letterboxd.
Thank you.
I can attest to that. And the show, like I said, is a great listen. You'll learn a ton of cool stuff about movies and history and their relationship to each other. Um, yeah, Jason, thank you again for joining.
Thank
This
you
has
so much.
been so much fun. Can't wait to have you back on so we can get updates about the book. And yeah, maybe we'll talk some Casino or Killers of the Flower Moon next time. Would be a ton of fun. We'll get away from Bogey and branch out to
Yeah, we need to
to
branch out.
maybe some De Niro instead of Bogey. Uh, amazing. Well, Screenagers, we will of course we'll be back next week with another essential movie. Next week we're going to be talking First Blood, a little John Rambo action. Very excited for that one. Some Sly Stallone. We should have Dahl joining and Kane. Dahl, our resident Sly Stallone guy. So very much so looking forward to that conversation. We hope to see you back there or back here on this feed, wherever it is that you're listening to us next week for that. And in the meantime, as always, I will see all of you lovely folks in the wasteland. Bye, everyone.